I would like to introduce you in this wonderful world of multicultural management. And perhaps it's important, first of all, to understand what is culture. Culture has many layers. It's like an onion. On the outside, we find the expressions, the products of culture. Things like the architecture we build, the food we eat, the language we speak, and the way we behave. But be careful, because these outside expressions can have different interpretations. People might buy sushis and hamburgers for different reasons. So we go to the second layer of the onion called culture. And that is the layer of norms and values. Norms are shared orientations of what we define as what we should do, and values are what we like to do. When something works, like breathing, the value of oxygen has become a norm through breathing, it slips out of consciousness and becomes a basic assumption. In other words, basic assumptions are values that have become norms. We try to structure basic assumptions in three main areas. The way we relate with human beings, we call them human relationships, and we distinguish 5 aspects: time and nature, which adds up to this so-called 7-dimensional model. Let me give you an overview of the 7 dimensions. On the one hand, we have universalism versus particularism. Some characteristics: a universalistic culture tends to go for rules and don't like exceptions that much. They have standards and love to standardize things in very universal rules. On the other hand, we have particularistic cultures who say, hey, yes, I know there is a rule, but I like the exceptional case. So let's go around the rule. Those cultures are characterized by more flexibility. The second dimension.
Okay, hi everyone. So again, everything is available on YouTube. You type anything in YouTube, you can find something on it, I'm sure. So yeah, of course, Dr. Trompenaars has materials on YouTube, which are nice summary statements of some fundamental principles in that book. And you know, as I mentioned before, I do like that book because he tackles head on an application of a theory for conceptualizing. He tackles head on defining values, norms, and attitudes, and that I think has to be applauded, because even if his characterization or definition needs further development, it's a nice first step that I have really been working with to apply and develop some problems or questions or issues I face as a political science person who is trying to understand politics and domestic political strategy. And so I still spend a lot of time thinking about the ideas he puts forth there. But before we go on, let me remind you, because otherwise I'll forget. I think you already saw that I posted on the course website the assignment for that it would be due tomorrow morning. That is a paragraph on chapter 3 and 4, related to chapter 3 and 4 of the Trompenaars and Hampton Turner book. And I would like you write a 150-word paragraph taking a pro or con position. Of course, there's no right or wrong answer. To South Koreans, the concept of culture is too broad. Do you agree, disagree? Is it a concept that's so broad it's not really useful? Is it some criticism of this notion of political culture, for example, that I heard over the years in my work, is that, you know, culture is everything you throw in where you can't explain behavior in terms of money and economic interests motivating political behavior, the kind of political behavior that you can't explain in terms of economic material interests or power drive interests is thrown into a category called that's due to culture. And that's not a very useful, the term is it's a residual category. And I've always thought about that over the years. And I think that's unfortunate. I think culture is critically important, and we're seeing it being critically important in the area of nationalism. Trump and Hampton Turner don't really talk too much about nationalism. There's a couple references in the book to how nationalists, they're at least reliable, right? That I think he even makes an explicit reference to America's defeat in Vietnam one time in this book. He makes a reference to America's defeat in Vietnam, showing the power of culture in mobilizing and unifying actors to oppose other actors, and that people that have strong culture should be applauded because those people, I think the argument is that they demonstrate integrity, that they are more likely to be concerned about doing what is ethically right, morally right, as Koreans understand it, or as Vietnamese understand it, or as Belgians understand it, or as Swiss understand it, or as Americans understand it. People that have a strong sense of allegiance to their culture are also going to be more prone to be concerned about what's moral and ethical. That you want to be a good American, I want to be a good American, you want to be a good Korean, you want to be a good Belgian, you want to be a good Swiss, you want to be a good French person. What does that mean? At least we think about that question. And so he says, don't criticize people for having strong cultural integrity. But that's only one sentence or two in the book. That's not a big focus of concern. But in terms of, again, my field of political science, it's important today, for example, the obsession that Russian nationalist public opinion has with Kiev and Ukraine, that belongs to Russia, and Russia cannot lose that territory to become something else called Ukraine. This country that was created by the communists in the Soviet Union 100 years ago, and then 30 years ago, it becomes independent because of political circumstances of chaos to create this formerly sovereign country called Ukraine that Putin insists is not a real country. That Ukrainians were something created by the Bolsheviks, by the communists in the 1920s in the Soviet Union. And for a number of different reasons, which I won't go into here, but that now the cradle of Russian civilization in the view of Putin, I'm not saying it's right, but that's the view of Putin and his supporters, and probably your typical Russian citizen, is that Ukraine is to Russia what Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria are to Jewish nationalism in Israel. That's where they were created. For Serb nationalists, we already talked about Kosovo, right? So there you see how much economic resources are the Russians willing to sacrifice to gain control over the cradle of Russian civilization, the supposed or alleged cradle of Russian civilization, Kiev. And that's a symbolic cultural issue. And the Russians are sacrificing tremendous economic resources as companies are closing their operations. Western companies are closing their operations in Russia. McDonald's just announced it's closing its 850 franchises that it owns in Russia. Oil companies, German, American, other companies are halting operations in Russia. The United States just announced it's not going to purchase any Russian oil and gas. The Russian economy is going to be devastated by these economic consequences of its invasion of Ukraine, of its Russian irredentism. You know, this term irredentism goes back to Mussolini in Italy. Mussolini, when he was fascist dictator of Italy, talked about Italia irredenta, Italia irredenta. These were translated in English as unredeemed Italy. Parts of Italy that are under control by those bad Croats and Slovenes and Greeks that must be redeemed by being liberated. How do you redeem them? By liberating them, you unify them to Italy. That's irredentism. And you saw the Serbs pay a tremendously high price to try to bring Kosovo under their control and to try to unify the Serbs who were cut off in Croatia and Bosnia into greater Serbia. And their gross national product per person declined by 50%, half. And of course, the Serbs eventually lost because there's only 10 million Serbs. There's 150 million Russians, at least. And they've got thousands of nuclear weapons. The Serbs don't have any. So, but you still see the high economic costs that these symbolic cultural issues, culture, its importance to people's political behavior and their social behavior in general. And you see it in the corporate, and you see it in the business workplace as well. That's a theme in the Trompenaars book, right? That you can easily insult people because you insult them in terms of their identities, usually unintentionally. You try to do something, impose a pay-for-performance system, for example, an American style system of paying people individually for their greater achievements. And the Italians in the little case study discussed here rebel because that's considered offensive. You can't divide people like that. People work as a group. People are successful because they support each other. Pay-for-performance divides them, makes them compete and hate each other. That's bad. From the Italian, it's unethical. It's immoral from an Italian point of view. And they'll hate you as a boss if that situation continues. And then as a boss, you've probably already lost because you're not going to be effective in mobilizing your business unit to achieve its objectives because morale will be low. Your employees don't trust you. So, yeah, that's why I like the Trompenaars book, because he emphasizes this role of, he doesn't say so much emotion, but he says issues of morality and ethics are at play here. When you talk about morality and ethics, you're talking about emotion. Like people, they have very strong opinions about what's the right and the wrong way to behave. And that's a product, that's culture, So please submit your 150-word paragraph to the Cyber Campus site, and then I will look at them tomorrow morning and send them back to you if to make some revisions if necessary, if you would like. And then on Friday we will have our in-class debate, pro and con. I will mark down on a piece of paper your pro or con positions. Today, as you know, is a public holiday. Once every 5 years, there's the selection going on for president. And so we're not meeting in class today, but I think on Friday we will try to meet in class. And I think since we're in the second week, that means everybody who has a ID number that ends in an even number, like 022468, should come to class, or invited to come to class, the classroom for our class on Friday. But we'll try to do this all on Zoom as well for those who are not there. And of course, we'll record the class on Zoom as well, so I can post the recording on the website. Just to remind us, the syllabus tells us where the class is meeting, and so I'm looking for the syllabus. Where's the syllabus? Where's the syllabus? Can't seem to find so quickly the syllabus here. Well, I think it's listed on the course website. So let's go to the Cyber Campus website and look there. And yeah, K107 is our classroom that we'll be meeting on Friday. Some of us will. The other 2 or 3 students will be on Zoom, and at least I'll be in K107. Broadcasting from K107 on Friday. So, but while we're here at the attendance, let's do smart attendance. And now we're into week 2 officially. So we go here, smart attendance, and your smart attendance number is 973. 973 is your smart attendance number. So I go to the chat and put in 973. And so 973 is your smart attendance number. So please enter in that number. And then we can go on to, of course, if you have any questions, you can always, ask me now or through the chat or whatever. And so let's go back then and talk about the course reading for this week, and just remind myself what I had prepared here. Okay, well, let's do another in-class vote here. So we'll go to vote, and because this is something we should have done from the previous week, but we were still getting organized in the previous week. So we go to the vote here. And so let's do this one. Just a second, I'm looking for, because I have a lot of exercises prepared for today. Okay, so here's a question I would like you to answer, and make sure that I am sharing the screen. So go to share screen, and we go here, and there you see, here is the question. In one test by Trompenaars and Hampton Turner, his co-author, the authors asked manager participants in a workshop to choose between two definitions of a quote unquote company. So, throughout the book, you saw that particularly in chapter 4, right? The Trompenaars and Hampton Turner, they organized these workshops, these international workshops involving, I guess by now, thousands of participants coming from different companies, typically people in the middle level of their career, right? They're in the middle level of their career and they're getting extra training to be prepared for potential possible promotion to senior management level. And Trompenaars and Hampton Turner carry out these intercultural management style workshops for people from all over the world. And while they're at these workshops, Trompenaars and Hampton Turner do surveys of their participants, and they ask them these questions. And these survey questions and the results are presented to you throughout the book. And they're fun because we can do them too. And we will do them here as well. And the first one that they do in the beginning chapters from last week is they ask you and I, or the participants, to define what is a company. And before I forget, let me tell you another anecdote, because I want to show you how, highlight how this discussion of culture is being framed in a way that Trompenaars and Hampton Turner want to develop for usefulness in application in a professional field, business, but not just business, including in any organization, including a nonprofit government agency or a non-governmental organization. And the point is that they develop their theories and conceptualizations and definitions of issues like culture and values in a way that's going to be useful for doing things, for actual policy making and policy implementation. And so that's why they say, for example, the theory that they present here is not intended to help for us to understand cultures. It's intended for us to understand cultural differences in the context of business administration. It's a theory for understanding cultural differences in the context of trying to work together to achieve some company's goals and objectives, which is an interesting way and a useful way for understanding that there can be many different definitions of what culture is, but your definition of culture depends upon why you want a definition. Why do you need a definition? What's the problem you're trying to solve? What's the issue you're trying to address? What's the problem you're trying to address? What's the issue, the obstacle you're trying to overcome? That will shape your understanding of a definition, your conceptualization of a definition of culture or anything, basically. And but I just want to say, obviously you can hire Trompenaars, and if you go on the internet, and you'll see Trompenaars as overseeing workshops all over the U.S. and the rest of the world. And I'm sure you got to pay Hans Trompenaars a lot of money to do those workshops. And I'm not saying that's a problem, but I'm highlighting how that his workshops, I think, are oriented towards middle-level managers. They already have a bachelor's degree in business administration. They already have a bachelor's degree, a bachelor of arts or a bachelor of science degree. So like you students, you're working now to get a bachelor's degree. And let's say you get a degree in any field, including in business, and you get a job, you go back to home or you stay here in Korea and you get a job, and then you're doing really well. but then your employer says, you know, if you really want to get promoted and make more money, you need to have credentials. You need to have a master's in business, an MBA, a master's in business administration. And typically, if you're a valuable personal resource, the company will pay for you to go to take classes for a master's in business administration. And these programs are set up by universities, and they're called executive MBA programs, executive master's in business administration programs. And typically people take those executive MBA programs with their company, their employer paying the tuition for them, paying the money for their students, for their personnel, their business administrators to take these programs, to participate in these executive MBA programs. And for the universities make a lot of money off of these executive MBA programs. And I know because when I was at the American University in Bulgaria from 1994 to 2009, the university had to focus on bringing more money into the university. And it decided to set up an executive MBA program in Bulgaria, in Sofia. And we were very explicit about it, that, you know, it's called a cash cow. It's a money maker for the university. You set that up in Sofia for business people working in companies, who their companies will pay their tuition for them to take the program in a nice setting. They will take the classes in the evenings, maybe once a week on the weekends, and then they'll have some kind of special summer intensive study program. That's what Trompenars is basically organizing, workshops as part of executive MBA programs. And that's why so many people participate in them, because, you know, people that are in business are typically in business because they want to make money. That's why when you fly to Korea or you fly to the United States, you can fly business class. Business class is nice and it costs a lot of money. And business people buy those tickets because that's why they do business, because they want money and they want the nice things that come with money, like traveling business class with better food and better beverages and, you know, so on. So that's why he has so many people participating in these surveys that are covered, particularly in chapter 4 that we're covering this week. And so beware. If you get a job in business and you do well, you'll probably be eventually involved in an executive MBA program, so that you can get your master's in business administration while continuing to work, right? Continue to keep your job. All right, but the first essay is, in one test by the authors ask management participants in a workshop to choose between two definitions of a company. So one way to see a company as a system designed to perform functions and tasks in an efficient way. People are hired to perform these functions with the help of machines and other equipment. They're paid for the tasks they perform. Or B, a company is a second way to see a company is as a group of people working together. They have social relations with other people and with the organization. The functioning is dependent on these relationships. So, I think this started now. And so I'm wondering, it goes until 12 o'clock. Has everybody voted? I think everybody has voted, right? So I'm just, okay. So let me edit that and say, I think it's now, yeah, which time it's, okay. And so it's anonymous, so I don't know how you voted. And and this is the result. Okay, there we see. Now we got another person participating. So we have 3 people in the class chose A, that a company, this is a very mechanistic view, right? That companies are formed for purposes to achieve objectives, and they can be adapted and modified, including the resources, including the human beings as human resources in organization as part of this mechanistic approach to achieving objectives, and people are paid for their tasks, versus a more communitarian, universalistic approach is that a company is a group of people that have social relations with other people, to which the value of the relationships and the people within it and to the group, a loyalty to the group is much more important, And Trompenaars and Hampton Turner, I think, would say that this view, B, and only 2 people voted B, it tends to prevail in East Asia, like here in China or in East Asia, also in not just in Asia, but also in Southern Europe, in Italy, for example, would be an example of a more communitarian approach to a cultural approach to understanding what it means to be professional in an organization. Whereas this A orientation, this is more British, Scandinavian, Netherlands approach, Northern European approach, more of a Northern European approach. Remember, they say that Europe is the most culturally diverse place in the world. So Southern Europeans are more like Asians rather than they are like Germans and Scandinavians. So that was, and let me, maybe I can find the results in the previous notes from last week about what the total results were from that approach. So if we go look for chapters 1 and 2, let me open up those readings from last week again. So we go here, we go share screen, and I go here, and yeah, this is chapter 1 and 2, just to see what the results are, because I took a photo of the figure. Okay, yeah. So that first approach, the mechanistic approach, that's for the view of the organization being a system, whereas B tends to view the organization as being more of a group. So A is a system, B is a group. So we go here and we look at these notes, and you can see the results from all the hundreds, maybe, I don't know, even thousands of people, of Portuguese managers, Thai managers, South Korean managers, for the percentage of respondents opting for a system. In other words, that A approach, the violet color approach here. So who chose A? Who chose A? A company is a system. And so you can see here the results. Who chose A? Portuguese, this is part of Southern Europe, the lowest of anybody, even lower than China. This is percentage, right? Followed by Thailand, South Korea is pretty low, Venezuela, Japan, Greece, France, Switzerland, Malaysia, India, Brazil, Italy in the middle here, then all the way up to Bulgaria. Now, and Czech. Now, okay, this is a problem in the book, and well, not a problem in the book. They emphasize it less in this edition than in the third edition, but you can see USA, you know, the fewest percentage respondents among the fewest are here. Now, this is an issue. You can see Sweden, United Kingdom, Denmark. But what do you do about Bulgaria? Look, I mean, not 100%, but 72% of the Bulgarians say it's a system. And what they argue, not so much in this book, although I think they still might make a vague reference to it, but in the third edition, the previous edition, Trompenaars and Hampton Turner thought these are all formerly communist countries: Poland, Russia, Czech Republic, and Bulgaria. That these people in these countries until 1990 were raised under Stalinism, communism, and you worked in communism as a social obligation to the group. You worked not for your own personal advancement, for your own individual wealth and advancement, ambition, for money. You don't work for money now. You work because it's a social obligation to the community, to create the socialist paradise, to do your contribution in a world without capitalist exploitation. And so you want to work because you love work, because you are freed from capitalist domination, exploitation. You live in a socialist society, and you shouldn't be doing it in order to advance yourself and get more money, 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 money. No, no. And then, of course, that system collapsed. And that collapse has been dramatic. And that collapse was over 30 years ago, before you were born, but it's still critically important. Any explanation, I would just say as a side point, as to what Russia is doing in Ukraine today has to be connected to the experience of communism and the collapse of the Soviet Union. So this collapse of the Soviet Union was over 30 years ago, but it's still very essentially important for understanding the horrible things going on in Ukraine right now. But the point they're making is there is a reaction among these formerly communist countries, a backlash against the way they were socialized under totalitarian Stalinist communism, to believe that people worked as a social obligation, not for individual ambition and self-advancement and getting more prosperous and money. No, and of course now they are working in the new capitalist system, but they're still dealing with that legacy that, you know, I'm supposed to be concerned about poor people. I'm supposed to be concerned about the well-being of other people. And you see this hostile backlash, reaction against still that legacy of totalitarian socialism. Even though today, you know, these countries have tremendous problems with corruption, right? Corruption is a major problem. And what corruption shows, this is this lack of agreement on what is the ethical right and wrong way to behave. There is much less consensus intellectually and emotionally in these countries as to how does a good Russian behave? How does a good Bulgarian behave? People might have their individual views, but they don't agree with each other as much as they do up here in Portugal or up here. They don't agree with each other. And so they can't agree. And so, and they still have that legacy of communism telling them, you know, we're supposed to be concerned about the well-being of others. But then you have ambitious, prosperous, smart people who are tired of being told that they have to be concerned about the well-being of others, and they have to pay lots of taxes in order to support social welfare systems for those other people that I really don't care so much about anymore, particularly if they belong to minorities like the Gypsies, the Roma population. And the view that people that are in government, they're all corrupt anyway. So if you pay your taxes, they're going to just steal it. Why would anybody pay taxes when you know the people that are in government receiving that taxes, they're going to put it in their pocket? So I'm not going to pay taxes. And so you can see the corruption just feeds on itself. And that was the argument that they suggested in their earlier edition of this book. But I thought it was interesting that it's not an Asian country that it rejects the notion of a company as a system versus a group. It's a European country, Portuguese. All right. So there you see the results. And it's just percentages, but I think that they've done this for, it must be thousands of people over the years that Trompenaars has been hired. And I already mentioned that KPMG, that big consulting and accounting firm, one of the big 4 consulting firms in the world, they bought Trompenaars' consulting firm just a few years ago. In other words, they invested money in it because it's a way for KPMG to make money. Okay, so and then let's go on to talk about the reading in chapters 3 and 4. So let's open that up, and maybe I can. Okay, so we stop share, and we go screen share, and we go here, and I think this is. Okay, let me close this because it's too many files are open, and I can't find where I want to go here. So I think this is it. All right. Now that's the lesson plan. One more time, screen share. I think, is this it? Yeah. No. Okay, yeah, chapter 3, the meaning of culture. I think you can all see that. There's some interesting statements they make that they write in clear language. We don't think about culture because we take it for granted. Only when we have a culture conflict do we become aware of culture. And that means when we're dealing with people that are not like us. They say only when a fish is no longer in water does it discover that it needs water. We need cultures. We are the creations of cultures. Cultures that give us a way to begin to understand how to behave in the world by giving us typically unspoken, habitual understanding of what is the right and wrong way to respond to challenges, to problems, to obstacles, to tasks. And that is culture. Culture sustains us. It's what makes us who we are. Through culture, we live and breathe as Americans, as Koreans, as Belgians, as French, as Swiss, wherever else we're coming from. Members of one culture may consider a certain level of material wealth to be essential, while members of another culture may not consider it to be so vital. So, but let's go on, because there's a lot in this chapter. They go on to understand that culture is to be appreciated. Culture is we're not to be afraid of culture. We need to understand culture. Culture is what makes us human in a lot of ways. Common ways of processing information are a necessity for social interaction. So there are certain assumptions that we need to make about each other that allow us to feel more or less comfortable interacting with each other, for meaningful communication to occur. And this is true for engaging in business. Diversity is becoming a feature confronting managers' cultural diversity, even within nationally limited organizations, as the workforce becomes more multicultural. So, there's more and more people, for example, coming into South Korea to work. And if people don't understand the reasons for differences in culture, they can become afraid and xenophobic towards the other cultures, towards the individuals who belong to other cultures. So I think that's also a task in the Trump, Bernars, and Hampton Turner book. They want us to develop understandings for differences in cultures. And if we develop understandings for why different cultures exist the way they do, then we're less likely to react with insecurity and therefore fear and maybe and dislike towards other cultures. And this has become an issue in Korea now that so many people are coming to Korea to live and work. I mean, again, several years ago, Korea is a country of about 49 million people. Several years ago, I read that 1 million people living in South Korea were not born in South Korea. So that includes you and me, who are internationals studying or living in South Korea, and including lots of workers coming into South Korea, and students as well. And so the challenges of intercultural diversity and miscommunication becoming more of an issue in South Korea. Here's a report. Let me just show you this real fast here. If I can find it here. Yeah, I'm looking for, there was a news report I wanted to show you, but maybe, yeah, here it is, right? So let me see. Just to show you how this is a current topic for government policy, how multiculturalism has become a bad word in South Korea. There's more and more people coming and working in South Korea who are Muslim, people coming from Central Asia, for example, from Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, and they're bringing their culture, including their religion, with them, and they want to build a mosque. They want to build a mosque in Daegu, in a city in Daegu, not too far from here from Seoul, and the Koreans are many Koreans are acting natively. They do not want this mosque to be built in Daegu, highlighting that Koreans they strongly emphasize the necessity of globalization because that's part of their successes. But the Koreans, they have a society that is, relatively speaking, is very culturally homogenous compared to, say, American society, and so they are acting they often react with more conflict to different cultural differences among different groups of people who are living and working in South Korea. And it also reflects some of the differences that Koreans have with international exposure like Koreans have lots of exposure to American culture, so they're more tolerant of American culture than they are of other cultures. And it extends to, for example, how they treat Black people. If Blacks coming from Europe or United States are treated differently from Black people coming from Africa in South Korea. And so, but the point is that these people are coming into South Korea because they're typically doing work that South Koreans do not want to do, right? Like the United States, with working in agriculture or construction, and so there's more and more of these people coming because, like the United States, Americans, native-born Americans, they won't work in agriculture, right? But you need people to harvest your crops. And so more and more of these people are coming in to work in difficult, dirty, and dangerous types of jobs. DDD, the 3 Ds, difficult, dirty, and dangerous jobs in Korea. And so let's go back to those notes just to show you, how these topics are really contemporary topics. And see if I can find the notes. Okay. And maybe I should just close that file because then it'll be easier to find the other ones. And okay, so we go back to the notes, share screen, and here. Okay, so yeah, the concept of culture. So we have to have mutual expectations. Is the absolute condition for meaningful interaction in business and management. So the existence of mutual expectations. You might think in business that international business cultural differences face less of a challenge in this regard, right? Because we all know we're in business. We want to make profit. We want to be successful in generating income and making profit. And that's true to a large extent. Right? I know if I'm going to deal with somebody from Malaysia or India or South Korea, if I'm a business person and they're in business, that's a fundamentally useful basic assumption. But that's just one necessary but not sufficient understanding or openness in our toleration that we need to have to be most successful in dealing with intercultural diversity and exploiting it for success in a globalizing, diversifying world economy. I'm not going to type out everything, retype everything out in the book, but he gives you an example about how we make certain assumptions, implicit assumptions about people, which can turn out to be wrong. And he gives you an example of it, even his home country in the Netherlands. And so, I won't go into that, but let's go on here. This mutuality of meanings is not the first idea that comes to mind when we think about culture. This notion that we have certain unspoken, typically unspoken, habitually assumed, shared assumptions about what certain things mean and what certain kind of behaviors imply regarding a person's background, a person's intentions, a person's objectives, which even inside national cultures cannot be taken for granted. It sounds to me like what he's talking about in this case about somebody buys matches and newspapers. This is a homeless person, and people that have what we define as mental illness. One of the reasons why they're called mentally ill is because they don't act in the way that we expect them to act, that any so-called quote unquote normal person would act. Aside from their being violent, even if they're not violent, people that have quote unquote mental illnesses are not able to function in a world in which there's certain expectations about what their obligations are for whatever reason. But this mutuality of meanings means these are typically unspoken. There's things we don't think about, which Trompenaars wants us to think about in the business world. So what does the concept of culture mean to you? And so he has this interesting little graph about implicit basic assumptions. These are things that people don't think about, but they just habitually assume are the right and wrong way to behave. Out here, these are explicit manifestations of culture, and that includes clothing and food and so on, and architecture. That's pretty obvious. But then there's a deeper level of culture that regards norms of behavior and values that we idealize and at least think we admire. And if you ask people to question these basic assumptions, unless you're clear as to why you're asking to question these basic assumptions, you might irritate them. Like, why are you wasting my time with an obvious question? Why is it important to know that answer to that question? If you ask, for example, if you ask a group of Japanese business managers, why do they bow when they meet each other? Like, somebody would say, well, why are you asking me that question? That's a waste of time. How does that question generate any kind of useful knowledge? Because we just assume that when you meet somebody, you bow. But when you have an international business environment where Japanese might meet Americans, or Koreans, South Koreans might meet Americans to open up a new factory, for example, Hyundai in Alabama. You know, Alabama doesn't typically have much experience with Asians. So these South Koreans are going to encounter Americans who do not bow. These Alabama people in Montgomery, Alabama, where Hyundai has a big factory, they're not going to know about how to greet people and act in certain ways. So then in that kind of intercultural, international context, then you do need to ask these basic questions that would be irritating for a Japanese to ask another Japanese, or a Korean to ask another Korean. Like if a Korean were to ask other Koreans, why do we respect age so much? Like, why do we need to even ask that question? But you do need to ask that question if Koreans are going to interact with Americans, because Americans, they're not so impressed by age. In fact, you know, Americans are, if somebody becomes less and less useful because they're getting older and older, Americans are more likely to view age as a problem, not as an advantage. Because as people get old, they get, you know, slower, and they have problems, and so the human resources decline in quality. You understand? Then there's a middle layer, norms and values. Norms and values, and they constitute what is considered right and wrong. And they may develop on a formal level, and we call those on a formal level. We are explicit about them, we think about them, and we write them down and say, you must follow them. We call those laws. And if you don't follow them, we'll punish you. And you must follow them. And the state will enforce them. We call those laws. They may also develop on the level of informal control, right? Like there are certain things you do and do not do or say, and that we know these. And the definition of good and bad are determined by values. So this is Trompenaars and Hampton Turner's notion of what values are. This is their definition. You can have other definitions, but this is their definition. It's closely related to the notion of ideas. Values are what we say we like. What we say we like and how we behave might be different. And if the difference becomes too great, then you have social tension and the potential for societal disruption, or on a national level, revolution, like what happened in communist Eastern Europe. The values are social welfare, work as a social obligation. Those are the values that communism taught the children that were growing up under communism, right? That people desiring money for its own sake is bad, right? And those are the values they were taught. But in the reality, as the society was changing, people became more and more focused on making money. Long before communism collapsed. Long before communism collapsed. I mean, I already told you the story about how so many Polish people and Bulgarian people and Russian people were going abroad in the 1970s and I think earlier to make money. They were sent as doctors and engineers and nurses to go work in Iraq or Libya or Syria and make money to send home these, when these countries in Eastern Europe were still communist, for these workers to make money to send home and have this valuable foreign currency, whether it be US dollars or German marks or French francs, what the communists called valuta, hard currency. And a dollar went a long way. And they were doing that in communist Eastern Europe long before 1989, for decades. So they already appreciate the value of money, particularly valuta, hard currency. But still they're being taught in communist schools that, no, acquiring money is not something you should value as a primary motivation. No, no. And so you see that reaction to the present, this hostile reaction in Bulgaria and Poland and Russia and Czech Republic, insisting that no, a company is a system. It's a system by which people are paid for their work, and they advance their own interests, and they take care of themselves. And if they're useful, fine. If they're not useful, get out. We don't have a social obligation to take care of you, even though you don't have anything really to contribute to the company. I mean, I saw that when I was in Russia. I went to Russia in 1985 when I was a student. I studied for a semester in Moscow. And, you know, anybody could get a job. You just walk into a place in Moscow and they had to hire you. You didn't have to work very hard. It was extremely difficult to fire somebody. I mean, I could tell you stories of things we did when we went. Maybe I will, you know, but I'm not going to try to do everything today. But I mean, just to give you stories of what the late communism was like in 1985, when I was there as a senior in college in Moscow, the weird things, you know, but, you know, nobody really worked under communism because you didn't really have to. And even if you worked, your money was of very little value. If you wanted money, you needed valuta. And one legal way to get valuta, hard currency, dollars, marks, francs, liras, was to go work in the oil industry in Iraq or in Libya, or as a doctor in a Libyan hospital. But other ways of getting valuta, hard currency, was through smuggling, through illegal trade, because it was still technically illegal to get dollars, to have dollars in Russia in 1985, in the Soviet Union when I was there. It was technically illegal for Russians to have dollars. If they had dollars, they had to show where they got them from, typically by being allowed to go work abroad at some point. Corruption, corruption, corruption. When the norms reflect the values of a group, then a culture is relatively stable. But a destabilizing tension likely will emerge when norms do not reflect values. When people, they know what the values are, that's what they're told or taught or say they value, but then there's the reality of what they actually do in their day-to-day existence, like smuggle goods or smuggle dollars or Deutschmarks into Soviet Union in 1985. That's the reality of day-to-day life. And disintegration of society is likely the result. And he highlights the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. Conscious and subconscious norms give us a feeling of this is how I normally should behave. Values give the individual or group a feeling of this is how I aspire or desire to behave. So even there's some feeling notion, right? That there's an ideal. When you say aspire or desire, there's an ideal or a stereotype or an archetype to which we should aspire, or at least we're told or taught we should aspire to that, right? But then there's the reality of how normally I should behave. And if there's great and growing difference between norms and values, you're going to get tension, you're going to get emotional conflict, you're going to get anger, hostility, confusion, fear, and maybe revolution. So in order to determine a choice from existing alternatives, a value serves as a criterion for choosing. But you can imagine, right? The difference is, you can imagine if you're in late communism growing up in Soviet Union or Poland, You're taught you should be the ideal Soviet person. You work for social obligation, you take care of everybody in the group, and then they begin to implement market reforms in your country. Even when I was in Russia in 1985, peasants were allowed to begin to farm vegetables for private sale in markets in Moscow. So if you really wanted fresh vegetables, the place you had to go was to this place where you could sell vegetables and fruits you grew on a small parcel, a small piece of private village land. But we were taught we're not supposed to promote ourselves through getting more and more wealth. And so you have this value. There can be lots of tensions, is my point. There can be lots of tensions between what we're taught, what we believe, say we believe, what we value, what we think we value, and then there's the day-to-day reality of existence, and that shapes the norms of how we behave. And again, he's talking about late communism here, the situation in Bulgaria and Poland. For example, e.g. means for example. The people in one culture may agree with the value. We all agree because, you know, hard work is essential to a prosperous society. So you should work hard in communism because you want your society to be prosperous and do well. However, at the same time, under communism, do not work harder than other members of the group, because then we would all be expected to do more and we would end up worse off. So if somebody's working too hard, that person may get negative feedback or responses from his colleagues because he's making them all, the rest of them, look bad. Because he's too enthusiastic in doing his job. Like, what's your problem, buddy? In this case, the norm differs from the value. And, you know, I think now that I'm speaking here, I think that's one reason why we should really appreciate living in a democracy, because in a democracy, we collectively have these discussions about what our norms and values really are. And we're allowed to, through freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, point out the differences between our values and the reality of our norms. The differences between what we tell ourselves and what we really do, and not be punished, not be thrown in jail for doing it. I mean, these are, if you pointed out these differences in the Soviet Union in 1985, you could go to jail. And keep this in mind, for a group's cultural tradition, including a national group's cultural tradition, to develop and elaborate shared meanings of norms and values that are stable and salient are necessary. So shared cultures a valuable trait. And I think it's not a coincidence that nation states have been, like Russia, like China, like United States, like Germany, like France, they have been more successful in developing than states which were created in the modern era with artificial boundaries, as the British Empire and the French Empire and the Spanish Empire and the Portuguese Empire and the Dutch Empire divided up Asia and Africa into these multi-ethnic states where people, they don't share common national cultures. They're multi-ethnic societies. We call ethnic groups we don't like tribes, right? Most states in Africa, they're a collection of different ethnic groups put together by the British and the French and the Germans and the Italians and the Spanish and the Portuguese, without any kind of, you know, without a national tradition of developing the way France developed over centuries in the Kingdom of France, or the way Germany developed in the area we call Germany today, or in Italy, right? So, so they go on in the book to highlight the core assumptions about existence. That's what culture deals with, assumptions about existence. And of course, over many generations, over centuries, the main challenge to existence of people living in what's the Netherlands or Holland is rising water. So it's not surprising that civilizations and cultures are intimately related to dealing with the cultural challenge, the environmental challenges that they face. The Swiss dealing with mountains and avalanches. I think it's not a coincidence that Switzerland has a tradition of self-government and local self-government, because they're divided into these mountain cantons. Central Americans and Africans dealing with droughts, Siberians with bitter cold, and so on. So that's a feature in the book. That's one of the 7 characteristics that Trompenaars and Hampton Turner focus on, is how different cultures relate to nature. The word culture derives from the same linguistic root as the verb to cultivate, which means to till the soil, the way people act on nature. If you want to test to see if there's some basic assumption in a culture, note whether a question provokes confusion or irritation. Ask a Japanese why they bow more deeply than others. Again, you're more likely to irritate them, because why are we concerned about that issue if we're all Japanese talking to other Japanese? Why would you even ask that? What don't you have something better to do? We gotta. I mean, but of course, when we're talking about intercultural, international business, we do need to be aware of these issues. So I already covered that. So let me jump ahead here. Culture is made by humans and is confirmed by other humans. Culture is conventionalized, in other words, standardized. There become certain stereotypical assumptions about what is the right and wrong way to behave, including, for example, we already mentioned, like for example, even in language, right? There's a right way to speak proper Bulgarian or proper Korean in a wrong way. And if you don't speak Bulgarian in the proper way, people will laugh at you. They say, you must come from an uneducated background. You're a peasant, right? So it covers everything, not just how we interact with authority, but like how we look, how we behave, how we dress, so again, I guess I'm not going to try to cover everything, but okay. Now dealing with cultural differences. This is, I think, an interesting point. This is taken from the book. You see this this figure. So American culture is largely inherited from European cultures, right? Because America was founded by Europeans, and then there's French culture, and French culture and American culture are different. So in terms of culture's norms and values regarding understandings of the right and wrong way to behave. And there's much overlap between American and French culture. And the overlap is here. And the differences are here. Now, you and I observing French people or American people, if I'm an American observing French people and French culture, French behavior to determine what French culture is, what's going to attract my attention? What's most likely to attract my attention? Is it going to be the similarities with American culture, or is it going to be the differences? And Trompenaars and Hampton Turner make that point, that what captures our attention are the differences. But we tend to exaggerate the differences because that's what captures our attention. If somebody acts the way I do, I don't think about culture very much. But when they act in ways that surprise me, French culture, Korean culture, difference. So, and then when you explain that difference, particularly when that difference is seen as problematic or perplexing, like why would the French act that way? It just seems so out of my experience. I might be afraid of it. I might even react with some degree of hostility to it. And so when I become afraid of it and emotion becomes involved, I'm likely to stereotype it. I'm likely to make fun of it. I'm likely to describe it in extreme terms. Like the French are very emotional. The French aren't always emotional, but sometimes they are. And when they are, typically more often than Americans, I'm likely to say, the French are so emotional. Even though, of course, Americans are emotional too, at times. Because, so they make a point. Stereotypes are gross simplifications. They're wrong, but we all tend to do it. We tend to simplify our understanding of other important actors in our lives in terms of getting what I want from them. And so if somebody who's French and they're acting in a way that I don't like or understand and like, I'm likely to stereotype. So people tend to stereotype because they notice differences rather than sameness. And aside from caricaturing the observed, stereotyping also caricatures. Caricatures means exaggerates, makes fun of, mocks the observer who stereotypes. So somebody who engages in stereotyping, they look silly as well. Stereotypes are an exaggeratedly limited view of the average behavior of a culture in a certain environment. So the French aren't always emotional. The French aren't always proud, nationalistic in their culture, but that's the image we have. In America, for example, we have this stereotype, and I've seen it even in young people when I was in among young Americans when it came to the American University of Bulgaria, that French culture doesn't like Americans, that French don't like Americans people. That's an exaggerated view, but that's the initial assumption we make. And that can be a problem if you're an American manager dealing with French people. If you assume that the French people are going to be a problem for you automatically because the French, they don't like Americans. People tend to equate something different with something wrong. In other words, if their way differs from our way, then their way must not be correct. But even in individuals in the same culture, people do not behave according to the same cultural norm. I mean, we talk about Americans, but I'm probably closer to Bulgarian or Korean culture in terms of some of my behaviors than I am to behaviors among certain minority groups in the United States. But we have these stereotypes, these images in our heads regarding Americans or French or so on. So cultures vary in solutions to common problems and dilemmas. And he notes, drawing from a long tradition of scholarly literature, there are 5 basic problems facing human beings, right? That how does the individual relate to the individual to others? How does the individual understood to be in relationship to the behavior of other people? What is the relationship of an individual to other people? And there are differences among cultures. What is the temporal focus of human life? There's differences between linear cultures like the United States versus synchronic cultures like Italy, where there's more of a focus upon on viewing time and tasks as synchronous and happening and simultaneously, and you should devote your attention to several tasks or issues at once. Americans think we all have to focus on the task. We complete this task, we move to the next task, and time is allocated to each of those steps. Whereas Italians or Southern Europeans, they're more likely to be doing multiple issues or considering multiple tasks at the same time. And for an American who's unfamiliar with that, these Italians, you can't get them focused on their job. What's wrong with these people? They're so uncivilized. They're like children, which is a stereotype, right? What is the focus on activity? Do you see your job and your relationship to your boss in terms of your just as a task, or is your job part of your diffuse social relationship with the broader community? How does the human being relate to nature, and how does and then the innate character of human nature? We'll talk about these throughout the rest of the book, actually. Okay, so we'll talk about the seven. Yeah, so here are the seven dimensions of human relationships, and that's referenced in the Trompenaars book. Universalism versus particularism. Like, do people focus on rules? You heard Trompenaars making that point. There are some cultures, like the Germans, right, that tend to focus more on rules. There's certain rules we follow versus modifying the rules in favor of exceptions to focus more not on rules, but on personal relationships we have with other individuals. Individualism versus communitarianism. Does the individual focus upon their own social status and advancement, or do you focus upon the well-being and status of your group, whether it be your family, your company, your university, your unit within the organization? Neutral versus affective. Do you openly express feelings like Italians and Frenchmen, or are you considered more civilized if you control your feelings and keep them under control and be neutral, right? Italians think a true human expresses the humanness of emotion. If you love somebody, you show it. Whereas in maybe German and maybe Korean culture, no, a truly civilized person masters their emotions. It doesn't freely give expression to them. And again, these opposites, they're not really opposites, because yeah, Italians master their emotions too, but they direct their emotions in mastering them. So you, of course, you direct your love to your colleagues in your workplace and you express it. Whereas a German mastery of emotions means you don't manifest emotions at the workplace. But the point is, both master, but of course the Germans, they expect you to be in favor of being European and making Germany a European country. And they can get very emotional about being a good European in terms of Europe's interaction with Russia and the rest of the world today. So these are not really opposites. It's yin-yang thinking. Diffuse versus specific. Is our workplace considered to be just a place where we go to work, and my relationship with my boss is only at the workplace, or is my job part of my overall social existence, including outside of the workplace with my seniors, my superiors? And achievement versus description. How do you accord status? How do you give honor and respect to somebody? Do you honor and respect them because of their age? Do you honor and respect them because of the college they went to? Do you honor and respect them basically on what they did last week, what they achieved last week, or what they achieved in the past 6 months or year in terms of meeting their sales goals? That gives you achievement. That gives you status. Achievement gives you status versus bringing your background. How much does your background give you status? That's description. Now, of course, they're related. Somebody who's a senior executive probably has lots of achievement and meeting goals, including market goals and profit goals, to gain that high background status. But like I said, these aren't really opposites. They're just presented as two ends on a continuum. And then, of course, there is also the relationship to nature and to time, which we'll focus on differently. Okay. Yeah, so this summarizes these points. A person's beliefs and actions through life are guided by the person's relative position along these dimensions. So, for example, If the established policy rules do not seem to fit a particular situation involving other big people in business, then do we, or it should, then do we do what we know the world would deem right, follow the rules, or do we adapt to the circumstances of the situation? In other words, do we change the rules to meet the exception? If we are in a difficult business meeting, do we show how strongly we feel and risk the consequences? If we're arguing, if we have strong disagreements, do we show our emotions and become emotional, or do we demonstrate admirable restraint? If we encounter a business problem, do we dwell on how everything is related to everything else, or do we break the problem down into pieces and address each piece without considering how these pieces may affect other business relationship issues that are not directly related to this problem? You can tell people do both of these, but some cultures emphasize some over the others. 5, do we acknowledge status on power of a business interlocutor on the basis of status or power, I should say, of a business interlocutor on the basis of what the person has achieved, or on the basis of their age, education, and pedigree, their lineage, their ancestors? This is more important in Italy, right? That Agnelli family is a famous business family in Italy, right? That they dominate so much of the Italian business world. So if you're born into the Agnelli family, you're going to get a lot of status because you were born in the Agnelli family. Okay, so let's go to an exercise. Okay, so you read this. So get ready to vote. It states here, you are riding in a car driven by a close friend. So imagine this scenario. You are riding in a car driven by a close friend. He hits a pedestrian, somebody trying to cross the street. You know your close friend was going at least 35 miles per hour as the driver of the car in an area of the city where the maximum allowed speed limit is 20 miles per hour. So you're in the car, your friend's driving the car, your friend is going too fast, your friend is going over the speed limit. He's going 35 miles an hour and the speed limit is 20, and he hits somebody walking across the street. There are no witnesses. His lawyer says that if you testify under oath that he was driving only 20 miles per hour, the lawyer of your friends tells you, if you testify under oath in a court before the judge that your friend was driving only 20 miles per hour, it may save your friend from serious consequences. There are no witnesses. Nobody saw this. Maybe it happened at 3 in the morning. What right has your friend to expect you, the driver, your friend, to expect you to protect him? My friend has a definite right as a friend to expect me to testify to the lower figure that he was driving 20 miles an hour, even though it's a lie. My friend has some right as a friend to expect me to testify to the lower figure that he was driving 20 miles an hour, which is a lie again. My friend has no right as a friend to expect me to testify to the lower figure. Okay, so think about that. And let me go back to the voting screen here. Let me go back to vote. And so I think it's question 1. Okay, so here's that question. So choose. Remember, it's anonymous. I don't know how you're voting. Nobody knows how you vote. A, my friend has a definite right as a friend to expect me to testify to the lower figure, 20 miles an hour. B, he has some right as a friend to expect me to testify to the lower figure. Remember, it's anonymous. You can be honest. I'm not going to know how you voted, so you don't have to worry about me judging you as morally bad. You can see how this becomes emotional, right? C, my friend has no right as a friend to expect me to testify to the lower figure, so please vote. So 4 people have voted so far. Okay. So 2 of you anonymously voted to declare that he has no right as a friend to expect me to testify to a lower figure. Remember, okay. Just to make it more challenging for you, do you know how many close friends we have in this world? We don't have many close friends. You know, I can count them on my one hand, the number of close friends I have in the world. And this could ruin my close friendship if I end up, you know, maybe this is 3 in the morning and that pedestrian going across the street was drunk. He was some drunken fool walking in the middle of the street. Why is that some drunken idiot at 3 in the morning walking in the middle of the street? He's not supposed to, you know, I could come up with all sorts of rationalizations, and I'm gonna really hurt my friend's life by testifying. Maybe the pedestrian was hit, but maybe the pedestrian wasn't really seriously hurt. Maybe they only broke an arm or something. This drunken idiot, this drunken fool, wasn't seriously hurt. You really gonna mess up your close friend's life because it gets on their record? It's on their legal record. If they're convicted of this, it's a crime. Just think about that. I know you're young. You know, I'm 59. I try to imagine myself in these scenarios. You know, I don't have a lot of close friends. Am I really going to lose one close friend because some drunken idiot is out 3 in the morning in the middle of the street where he shouldn't be? My friend has a definite right to expect me to testify to a lower figure. He has some right as a friend to expect me to testify to a lower figure. Okay, so there you see the results. So those of you who voted differently than the others, you know, if you voted here and you see how these voted, you know, you'll ask yourself, are these people uncivilized? Are they crude, dumb, bad people? No, but that's the stereotype. If somebody doesn't act like me, somebody's inferior to me. They're acting in the wrong way. They're not well socialized. They're not civilized. And Trompenars and Hampton Turner have done this test with thousands of people. It's mentioned in that TED talk that I showed you last week that Trompenars gave. He presents the same scenario. So then we go back to, here's the next question. What is your sworn, what do you think you would do in view of the obligation of a sworn witness and the obligation to your friend? Would you A, testify that he was going 20 miles an hour, or E, testify that he was not going 20 miles an hour? Again, it's anonymous. I can't know, and I will never know. There's no way I can know how you voted. So please vote. So there's 3. 2 more people, please vote. Be honest. Wow, look at that. Oh, look at that. 4 people went with E, not testified he was going 20 miles an hour. Oh, hold it. Oh, no. Most of you, no, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. Most of you would not testify he was going 20 miles an hour. So bye-bye, good friend. Okay, so then let's go back to the notes and look what they found in their survey of thousands of people on this. And we go back to the notes. And what did they find? So percentage of respondents opting for a universalist system rather than a particular social group. So, you know, a universalist would refuse to testify that your friend was going 20 miles an hour. A universalist would select E, right? A universalist would expect C. Versus a particularist would say, well, you know, there are always exceptions. And here are the results. Percentage of respondents opting for a universalism. In other words, we're not going to testify that he was going 20 miles an hour because that would be a lie and that would be wrong. So Venezuela is the lowest. Nepal, South Korea is pretty low. So I don't know how many Koreans are in the class, but you can see South Koreans are pretty low here. Oh, Gloria has raised her hand. So let me go.
Yeah, yes, sir. I'm sorry. I just cannot see your screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you for, because it says it says I am screen sharing. So let me go back and do that again. And I think you can see this. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Students can now see your application. So Venezuela is the lowest in terms of being universalist, that we have to follow the rules. He was not going 20 miles an hour, so I'm not going to testify he was going 20. That would be a lie. Venezuela is the lowest in accordance with that. Nepal, South Korea is pretty low. In other words, South Koreans would not tend to testify against their friend. They would lie. Russia, and who's at the height here? You see UK, Australia, Sweden. Look, in the 90s. No, of course I wouldn't testify against my friend. Of course I wouldn't admit that they were going more than 20 miles an hour, because they were because they were going over 20 miles an hour. So of course I would say that they were, of course I wouldn't lie for them. Switzerland, USA, Canada, Ireland, Sweden, Australia, UK, Netherlands. Look at that in those numbers. You don't see this in basically any of these surveys this high. But look here: Venezuela, Nepal, South Korea, Russia, China, India, Bulgaria, Indonesia, Greece, Mexico. Particularist cultures. You can see these. Hold it. Can you see that? I'm not seeing the screen pop up here. Okay, there you see the differences here. So particularist cultures, in contrast, are more likely to support their friend as the severity of pedestrian injuries increase. Oh, well, that's interesting. Maybe the pedestrian is seriously hurt. I mean, my friend, if I testify against them, my friend might go to jail. But again, what if that idiot was a drunken fool at 3 a.m, stumbling in the middle of the street, wearing black, no reflective clothing, or just laying down? I mean, there was a time I used to go jogging in the morning here, and I would see drunk people laying in the road. Twice I saw drunk people laying in the road at 5 a.m. Car could hit them. Is the driver of the car supposed to go to jail for hitting that drunken person who passed out in the middle of the road, wearing, regular clothes, no reflective, nothing? I mean, I'm not justifying, I'm just highlighting the complexities of these issues. What if my friend has a family? What if my friend has to take care of that family and the children? Oh. Universalists would tend to view such an attitude as corrupt. What if we all started to lie on behalf of those close to us? They would claim that society would begin to collapse. Okay. Particularist cultures base their logic on the heart and human friendship. But at the same time, that yin and yang notion, this logic, however, may be the chief reason why citizens would not break laws in the first place. And the law may also become a weapon in the hands of corrupt authoritarian ruling elite. And then what is corruption becomes a subjective issue. I mean, to this day, for example, when I was in Bulgaria, let me just say, when I first got there in 1994, this is just 4 or 5 years after communism collapsed. All of the laws that had been adopted by communist Bulgaria were still in place for the most part. You can't run a capitalist economy on the basis of those communist era laws. So anybody to be a successful business person in Bulgaria or Poland or Czech Republic or Russia in the 1990s, they had to become a criminal. they had to break the law because the law was ridiculous. The law was made for communism and state socialism. Are you always supposed to follow the law in China, in North Korea? Maybe you have to because you're afraid, but that doesn't mean the law is right. All national culture communities agree that the community should resolve universals and particulars because we all know there are going to be rules and then exceptions to rules. And the community should judge exceptional cases by more humane values. However, they differ. Everybody agrees on that. However, they differ on their starting points, with the necessity of starting with rules and then making exceptions and deciding whether exceptions are good, or starting with the fact that I have a friend, I need my friend needs me, my friend gives meaning to my life. And so what do I do with the rules when my friend is in trouble? Universalists are more common in Protestant cultures. That means Northern Europe. By obedience to God's written laws, the congregation directly relates to God. There are no intermediaries. There are no human intermediaries between God and his adherents. In Protestant cultures, no one hears confessions, forgives sins, or makes special allowances like in a Catholic church. In Catholic cultures retain this more particularistic relational approaches, which are the features of the Catholic religion. People can still sin, but they can find compassion for the unique circumstances. God is like the particularist Catholics. He understands why I lied for my friend, particularly for a friend who had bad luck with a stupid pedestrian being where the pedestrian should not have been. He goes on there to state, Trump and ours, that nations with strongly universalistic cultures try to use the courts in order to mediate conflicts. So the US is the most litigious society on earth, one where people are most likely to take their interpersonal disputes to a court to resolve them. So the US has far more lawyers per person in the US than does particularist Japan. I mean, it's starting to change in Japan, but Japan until recently had incredibly low numbers of lawyers who worked there because you didn't resolve your disputes through public official courts. The more universal the country, the greater the need for an institution, a national institution to protect the truth. Depending upon what the rules are about, countries may be more or less universalist. French and Italian business managers who were particularist in the traffic accident case, for example, tend to be universalistic when writing on the topic of food, on which they believe we have a universal obligation to adhere to the truth. That's interesting. That almost relates to status, right? That because French and Italian cooking has become such a high-profile money-making business enterprise around the world. I mean, even to this day, you know, I listen to the cooking shows on the National Public Radio in the US, and they talk about the French cuisine, French cookbooks, that they somehow set the standard for cuisine as a global issue. So perhaps it's not surprising the French are very proud of that, and they claim they set the rules for organizing and running a successful high-end restaurant. Okay, here's another one. You are a newspaper journalist who writes a weekly review of new restaurants. A close friend of yours has sunk all her savings in a new restaurant. So you're a newspaper journalist and you write reviews, maybe on Yelp or whatever. Now everything's digitized, and you write reviews of restaurants. And your friend, your close friend, has invested all of her savings, all of her money into a new restaurant. You have eaten at your close friend's restaurant, and you really think the restaurant is no good. What right does your friend have to expect you to go easy on her restaurant in your review that you're going to post on the internet or on an electronic newspaper? you're going to go easy on reviewing your friend's restaurant. Your friend, knows you review restaurants. So you're going to review your friend's restaurant. A, she has a definite right as a friend to expect me to go easy on her restaurant in my review. B, she has some right as a friend to expect me to do this for her. C, she has no right as a friend to expect me to do this for her. So let's go back to, go back to the vote page. And we go back to vote here. And no, sorry, wrong one. 3. Okay, here. Okay, so I think you can see this, right? Make sure you can. So, vote for A, B, or C. A, she has a definite right for me to be nice to her on the review, even though I think her restaurant's I don't think it's good. B, she has some right. C, she has no right. And let's see how you're voting. Again, it's anonymous. So that's 4. I thought there might be one more person that will vote, 1 or 2 more people. Okay. C, she has some right. Really, she has some right. Even though you think the restaurant is no good, you're going to be nice to your friend and deceive all of those readers of your review on the internet because you're not 100% honest. I'm trying to provoke you, obviously, But you can see the role of emotion, right and wrong, ethics and moral. So one person wrote that she has a definite right for me to lie. I mean, it's a review of a restaurant. So what? It's not like hitting a pedestrian, right? But what about reputation, right? You want to be successful as a reviewer on social media. If you say, oh, this restaurant's okay, and I go there and it's a disaster, I'm never going to trust that person again to tell me that that restaurant is a good restaurant. Oh. Okay, then we go back to the 4th question here. Okay, so again, make sure you can see it. Share screen. So vote. Would you go easy on her restaurant in your review, given your obligation to your readers and your obligation to your friend? Yes or no? Again, it's anonymous. Okay, and the fact that the Trompenars and Hampton Turner are asking these scenario questions to you is because they have found in surveying all of these managers from all these different cultures that there are genuine differences among national cultures about what is the right and wrong way to behave. I mean, and fundamentally different differences. And I saw that in Bulgaria when I was there. I couldn't believe some of the things my Bulgarian colleagues told me about how I should and should not behave. Like as an American, you gotta be crazy. What are you talking about? We don't. This is the American University in Bulgaria, damn it. We're an American university, not a Bulgarian university, an American university. So we have to act in the American way. And it doesn't take much to go in the direction of cultural imperialism in that kind of situation. Okay, and then, okay, so let's go on to the next one. There's another one coming up here. The universalist journalist assumes that he or she is writing for the universe of readers, not for his or her friend, to be truthful and unbiased, in other words. So universalizing good taste, like French cuisine, appears to be more important than universalizing legal procedure in some societies, like in US, for example. In France, there's more of a focus on universalizing good taste rather than universalizing state procedures. So here you see the percentage of respondents who would not write a false review or would give no right to the friend to expect to be helped. So these people, only 24% of Serbs would not write a false review. 43% of Polish respondents would not write a false review. In Finland, 75% of Finns responding would not write a false review. South Korea, 45% would not write a false review. This comes up today, for example, in coverage of the news media and the election in Korea today, right? One of the news reports I heard on the American radio this morning was about how there's strong intergenerational differences between young people in Korea who didn't experience, not, of course, the Korean War, and didn't experience the military dictatorship, that have grown up only under democracy since 1987, and the older generations. I don't know if that relates here, but you see South Korea, not as low as Serbs, but not as high also as some other countries in terms of being more willing to write a false review than these other countries. These countries are more willing to write a false review. These respondents are less willing to write false reviews. Again, post-communist countries, although Russia's here. Here's another one. You are a doctor for an insurance company. You examine a close friend who needs more insurance. You find he is in pretty good shape, but you are doubtful on one or two minor points that are difficult to diagnose. So here you see. What right does your friend have to expect you to tone down your doubts in his favor? So your friend needs more insurance because now if you are a doctor and you diagnose them as having a lot of problems, they're going to have to pay more for the insurance, and your company, for the insurance company, is going to have to pay more money if that person gets sick. So what kind of diagnosis are you going to give to your friend as a doctor? My friend, the doctor, has a definite right as a friend to expect me to, my friend, sorry, as the patient, has a definite right as a friend to expect me, the doctor, to tone down my doubts in his favor. Or my friend has some right as a friend to expect me to tone down my doubts in my diagnosis or my examination of my friend as the doctor in his favor. Or my friend has no right for me as a doctor to tone down my doubts. Would you help your friend in view of your obligations? So let's go back to the screen share and go back here. And so we go to question 5. So please respond. Would your friend expect you to, as a friend, definitely has a right to expect you as a doctor to tone down your doubts in your examination or diagnosis of your friend for insurance? B, your friend has some right to expect you as a doctor to tone down your doubts. Again, it's anonymous. And C, he has no right to expect you as a doctor to tone down your diagnosis. So again, we have 5 respondees here. My friend has a definite right. Okay, interesting. And then let's go back to the next part of the same question. I think you can just make sure you can see that. Would you help your friend in view of the obligations you feel towards your insurance company and your friend? Would you agree to help or disagree to help? Yes or no? Agree is yes, no is disagree. It's anonymous. Is another person going to vote? If not, well, you can see the class is divided. Okay, so And again, we just assume that people are doing what they think is the right thing, the moral, ethical thing, whether they choose, agree or disagree, yes or no. Oh, we have agree, yes. The fifth person has signed on. And go back to the notes. So here's the percentage of responders who would not tone down their doubts in favor of their friend. So only 20% of Serbs would refuse to tone down. Most Irish would refuse to help out their friend on this diagnosis. Czech Republic, closely following Serbs. Russia. I should tell you, as I look at this again, Bulgaria here, Egypt, we're South Korea. South Korea is here, 44%. I mean, we're not talking about vast differences, 44 versus 70%, but there's still significant differences. Romania is the same as South Korea, Singapore. I mean, I could tell you stories. I think I mentioned, right, that I was a professor at the American University in Bulgaria for a number of years. And it was interesting to see how Bulgarians' understanding of healthcare as a social and economic justice right was playing out in that country while I was there. I mean, it was really remarkable. I mean, Bulgarians under communism really internalized this notion that, of course, if you're sick, society has the obligation to take care of you. There should not be any money involved. No money involved. And the Bulgarian new democratic government in Bulgaria in the 1990s and onward was trying to bring more profit incentive into the Bulgarian healthcare system to reform it. But I remember when I tried to pay, I had to pay a doctor to get a wart removed from my thumb. And when I paid the doctor some money, he was almost embarrassed. Like still this notion that you should pay money for society to give you health care? What? No. But the Americans saying, oh, no, you have to bring in more monetary incentives into the system. I have other stories as well, right? So the Japanese and Indonesians show a sharp jump in favor of universities' approach to corporate confidentiality in contrast to situational ethics. And so I guess they're talking about Japan and Indonesia, right? Even though they're willing to help out their buddy who was driving the car, they're much less likely to bend the rules or help their friend in this insurance medical examination. And they think that it might be because of loyalty to their company. You're a doctor who works for that insurance company. So you're supposed to be loyal to the company you work for or loyal to the organization. And that appears to be a factor shaping these differences in responses. I mean, at stake here appears to be loyalty to a group or corporation, and it's broader than loyalty to a friend who is an individual outside the group or the corporation. And so they give you differences, summarizing the differences between universalist cultures and particularist cultures. And, universalist cultures like the American culture, they tend to be really focused on, contracts. And they have to you got to drop a contract. Whereas particularist cultures, they don't focus so much on contracts. A trustworthy person is one who honors the contract. In a particularist, that's in a universalist rule-based society. In a particularist relationship-focused society culture, a trustworthy person is one who honors changing mutualities. You have obligations to your friends and family, and those have to be honored in changing circumstances. And And also in these kinds of societies, business relationships are personal. They're personalized. And in a universalist society, a deal is a deal. There's only one truth or reality that's which we have agreed to in the contract. And in particular societies, there are multiple perspectives. There are several perspectives on reality relative to each participant, and relationships evolve and change. So what our obligations to each other will also evolve and change. And then they give you tips for doing business for universalists doing business with particularists. And so I don't know, I really want to, well, I guess maybe we can go through it because we're running out of time here. But I think I have another exercise lined up here. Maybe I don't, maybe that was it. Yeah, I think that's all for the exercises in chapter 4. So just to summarize, let me make sure you can see the screen, share screen. Again, this is for students in business. Universalists advising, if you're advising particularists, like I guess South Koreans dealing with Americans, be prepared for rational, professional arguments and presentations that push for your acquiescence. For universalists, if you're advising particularists and you're dealing with Americans, do not take impersonal, get down to business attitudes as rules, because as rude. So Americans, they just want to get the job done, get the work done in the morning, and get it over with. Whereas Japanese people, they don't like that attitude too much. They want to establish a relationship first. For particularists, universalists will try to carefully prepare the legal grounds. They're going to really emphasize the role of the legal department of the company. For particularists, in dealing with particularists, for universalists, be prepared for personal meandering or relevancies that do not seem to be going anywhere during meetings. Like, why are we talking about this? Do not take personal get to know you attitudes as small talk. Like, small talk is really important. And carefully consider the personal implications for your legal safeguards. Okay, and finally conclude, when managing and being managed, universalists strive for consistency and uniform procedures, institute formal ways of changing the way business is modified, modify the system so the system will modify you, signal changes publicly, seek fairness by treating all cases in the same way. Whereas particularists build informal networks and create private understandings, try to alter informally accustomed patterns of activity, modify relations with you so that you will modify the system, pull levers privately, seek fairness by treating all cases on their special merits. Okay, that's it for today. Anybody have any questions? And if not, I'll look at your paragraphs tomorrow, okay? Bye.
Bye, thank you.